All right, welcome. We're going to do our kick and bass today. So, leading on from the template we built out in the first recorded session, we have our template here for Dark Prog. We're going to move on to kick and bass. So we've got our MIDI ready to go. We'll begin with probably our kick design and then move into bass line. I'll just give you a listen. This is the sound that we're going to be aiming for, or close abouts anyways. Cool. So let's begin with the kick drum. Like I said, we've got our MIDI drawn in here, ready to go from the first session. I'll try and keep this very simple and only speak about the important information that you need. We're using Kick 3 plugin. I've just gone in and initialized this patch here, so it's just a flat sine wave. And we're going to create our kick from here. Beginning in the pitch envelope, we'll just start to have a bit of a muck around and see if we can get the shape roughly how we want, and then we can tweak as we go. I'm pretty close there. The length, we've got a track here at about 140 BPM, so I like to set my kick drum length to about 1/8 note, which there's a converter that you can find online, and just type in your 1/8 note length for whatever particular BPM track you're in. In this instance, 140. It's around 214 milliseconds. So I will set my kick length to about 214. For this genre, I want my kick and bass to be quite passive. I don't want long tails, so everything should be, hopefully by the end of this, sounding nice and tight and compact. Just help give as much clarity and definition for each instrument to do its job. That sounds like a nice clean pitch drop. I don't like too much attack. Sometimes you can find these, pitch nodes. I used to create them quite high. They gave a bit too much click in my opinion, but we can tweak this as we go. But for now, we'll just dial it back a bit. I'm happy with that for now. Maybe somewhere there. Moving on to the amp envelope. Getting pretty close there. Alright, just adjust and give this a little bit more click actually. Just a little bit more crack at the top end, the attack there. You can, in this kick 3, you can import and create your own clicks. I like to do it just in this pitch envelope to begin with here, rather than layering different sounds. I just think it's I can get a cleaner kick drum sound for my taste. That has a nice pitch drop down to about F, around 40 Hertz. Cool. Pretty close there. Just referencing against the kick drum that I created before. Sounding pretty close. We can get that a bit closer with some EQing, which we'll do now. So we've got our kick synthesized. The next area that I like to work on when it comes to EQing my kick drums is removing some of this boxiness out of this low mid-range here. So we'll just open up EQ8. I've got this set up from the template, but we'll just dial that off for now and have a listen. Around this 400 to 500 Hertz range, there's sounds in this particular kick drum and this style that I don't like, that I don't need. So and I generally find that it's the way for most of my tracks that I like to cut this out of my kick drums, which is why I set this up as my template to always remove this 400 to 500 Hertz range. Depending on the kick drum that I create, obviously that will move and vary. However, it's generally in this 400 to 500 range where the muddiness and the boxiness kind of sits, which we just don't need, especially when we're looking for like punch and clarity for kick drums. So we'll just have a bit of a play around and see where we can get that sounding nice and clean. Cool. Happy with that for now. And then this other EQ that I have here, this is just to remove some of the presence generally that can be a bit too harsh on the ears around the 2000 to 3000 Hertz range. In this instance, well, it's not too bad, so this is probably a bit overkill. Just taking a look on the oscilloscope. So our kick that we're referencing here that we've created already, it's a lot longer, so we will just try and make this one a little bit longer as well to suit, to get a bit more thump. At the moment it's a bit short, it's a bit percussive for what we're after. That's sounding a lot better. We'll just jump back into this EQ and have another muck around with this boxy sound. That's sounding nice and clean now. Cool. Alright, moving on to... Actually, before we do that, I might just roll off some of the low end. It's a little bit sub heavy. So bring up our oscilloscope here again on the bus. It's a little bit boomy. Pop that there. You can see what's going on as we tweak. Try and get his tail sounding right. Not fully happy with it just yet. So I don't want to bring this low pass curve here too close to the fundamental, which we're working around 43 Hertz, as it will start to muck around with the phase too much. Might just set that around 35 Hertz and just dial back some of the sub. Alright, we will leave that there. And we'll move on to our baseline. Get this peaking around minus 12 dB. Pretty good there. Okay, moving on to our bass. So we're using Serum, and we will start with a sawtooth with oscillator E. Go basic shapes, sawtooth. So we've got our notes drawn in here, our MIDI. D. So that's in key and in the scale with our kick, which pitches down to F. So it's 1/3 below our kick drum. So we want to go random down to 0. We'll begin with the phase at the very beginning. Put a filter on this, a low pass. Nice sub sound there. So with our low pass filter, we will start with our envelope 1. So after a nice stabby percussive sound here, which will shape this envelope 2. Just open that filter up so we can hear what's going on. Modulate the cutoff. Just bring up our oscilloscope as well here to have a look at what's going on with the shape. Using oscilloscope. Just after a nice percussive, quite a shorter note. We'll just take a look at the MIDI note here real quick, but it's quite short compared to, I guess, a standard full-on psytrance length note. I like to have them this short when I'm doing Dark Prog because I like to make my bass lines quite low down the octave don't want too much mess. So if these notes are quite long, it can all start to blend in with one another and sound like a big old bassy soup. Which, if we've got the envelope set correctly, then we'll be able to see what's going on there, but I haven't. Cool. So that's percussive and stabby. The next thing I'll do, and I like to control the sub in this way, we'll go in here and we'll take out the fundamental frequency of oscillator A. So now we've got no sub frequency for our D note bass. We'll add that back in with the sub oscillator. Now, when we're phase aligning our kick and bass, we can adjust the level of our bass sub individual to the rest of the other harmonics. So we can get the kick and bass sub frequencies nice and well balanced without affecting the upper harmonics of the bass line. It just gives us a little bit more control. Somewhere around that 75% mark is sounding pretty good. So that's our sub frequency playing solo there. Now what I like to do to phase align my kick and bass is leave the sub frequency on, leave the sub oscillator on, sorry. So it's just the sub playing. We'll bring up our kick drum. If we just have a look at where our kick is playing in regards to the phase, our goal here is to get these phases completely aligned. So if we have a look at our sub, it comes down into the negative. So we will tweak either the kick tail in kick 3, we can tweak the phase in our Serum plugin, and the other thing we can muck around with too, which I like to do, is the length. We can play with the length of our kick drum to move the phase either forward or back without compromising the tonality of the kick drum that we've created too much. So what we'll do now is we'll just get these phases for the kick and the sub in line. We'll just have a play around with probably the kick drum tail to begin with, and we'll go from there. Just pop this up here so we can see what's going on as we start to tweak all of these phase parameters. So now we've got that perfectly in phase. You can see that there's no distortion of the kick tail phase, and there's no distortion of the sub, the bass line. So they should they multiply together, and so we don't see a phase cancellation happening. We see an increase in volume because they're completely in phase with one another. So if I just show you them individually. And then playing together, we should have no phase cancellation whatsoever. If I was to go ahead and adjust the phase and knock them out of phase, you'll see this start to distort, and we'll lose all our power, clarity down the bottom end. That they're completely 180 out, almost 180 out, so there's phase cancellation happening. So it's super important to get this lined up correctly. We'll just go ahead and turn our oscillator A back on. And we can start to tweak. Another thing I like to do before we go too much further in shaping the sound of the sub, shaping the sound of the bass, is this LFO tool I use as just some volume automation for the first bass note. Obviously there's lots of different ways you can do this. You can use compression. However, I like to do mine with just a simple volume automation, so I can keep the drive of the kick and bass charging along without knocking off that first 16th completely. So then I can muck around with the different drive that I'm after for the particular track, and in this instance we're going to go for obviously a Dark Prog track that we're creating. We're going to go for something that's quite nice and driving. We don't really want it too bouncy. Next thing, to further enhance the phase of our bassline, saturation. Just turn that off for now. Three bands here. Put some clean tube saturation on these upper frequencies. Bring up our oscilloscope and we can have a look at what's going on as we start to muck around with the phase with this saturation plug-in. Only want to affect these. I don't want to put this saturation plugin on the sub frequencies for this particular bassline, so we've just got this band turned off, and this crossover point here is what is manipulating the phase of our sub. So we'll leave that lower band off, turned our mid-range band on here. Just playing around with some EQing on this bass line now. At this stage, I'm just going by ear. I'm trying to just find some different characteristics to come out of this bass to kind of get it to have a bit more character. This is obviously all personal preference at this point, but the sound that I'm after is, I guess, yeah, a little swampy, percussive, and just trying to bring out some characteristics in this bass to make a kick and bass sound a little bit nice and grouped together in a way that makes them sound cohesive. Got to be mindful here now, since we've got our kick and bass in phase with each other. Everything that we do, whether it's EQ, saturation, any type of filtering, we will start to muck around with the phase alignment. So we just need to be mindful. Anything that we do change as I move this frequency of this filter on this equalizer, we're watching and making sure that we're not knocking these out of phase, and that we have to keep going back and tweaking if we do. You know, I like to get different characteristics coming out with saturation plugins and filters. We just need to make sure that our kick and bass stays in alignment at all times, or at least make sure that we put it back in alignment once we've finished tweaking. can see that's shifting there. We're probably just looking for a little bit more crack on our bass line, which one thing I do like to do is get the kick and bass phase relationship completely perfect in the sub frequencies, and then sometimes I'll put a click layer on top of my sub that I create from another kick plugin, which I'll show you that method once I'm happy with the sub frequencies and their alignment and their relationship together. Might tweak that tail a bit to bring that back in alignment. I've knocked it out. It's actually adding a nice little bit of warmth down the low end with that warm tape on there. Might just leave that on for now and we'll have a little play with that. We'll just try one more. One more thing to enhance the phase of this sub and kick relationship. Just onto our kick and bass group now. Might apply some compression with this glue compressor. A really great option that I like to use is the SSL. Bus compressor here from Solid State. Obviously not everyone has this, but it does. It just sounds good. Like it just really makes. I feel like it really glues it together. I love it. I use it on all my kick and bass buses. We will go with the stock plugin for now. And what we're doing is just trying to close the dynamic range a little bit just by adding a little bit of compression for the kick and bass to get the levels quite close together, so there's not too many variations between the kick and the bass levels, so they sound like they're one and coming out of one channel and they're in harmony together. We don't need much. We're looking for maybe 2 to 3 dB. That sounds good to my ears. On this channel here we've got an EQ which we can further manipulate the phase of the bass and the kick together. Sometimes it can sound nice. Obviously just being mindful not to knock out too much of the low end. Just need to be mindful now that we've gone in and put this EQ on and we're cutting off some of those sub frequencies. You can see what's happening to the note length. It's actually bleeding into each 16th and causing some pre-ring. So we just need to be mindful not to destroy the attack of each of our bass notes. As you can see, this pre-ring, this tail coming through here. What I like to do is if I like the sound and the tonality that this filter, that this cutoff, this low pass, low cut, I should say, that this low cut is giving the bass applied on the kick and bass channel together. They're still remaining in phase with one another. However, I will bounce this down to audio once I'm happy, and then I can further manipulate the length of the bass notes by splitting them, putting a fade on, and tightening them up a bit. Or you can go into your sub, you can go into your plugin and adjust the note length via your decay times and release times of your plugin. But the way I like to do it is get it down to audio and finalize the sound Once I'm happy with the characteristic of the kick and bass sound design, we'll bounce it to audio and then freeze and flatten the track. I'll just have a little bit more of a play around and a listen to see if I'm happy before we do that. Okay, so we're getting close. Might just make sure I haven't got too much bottom end sub frequencies. might just leave that EQ off for now. Just keep it how I originally had it. And I'll just show you this other method that I use for a click on top of this sub to help the bass line kind of cut through the mix, and it will come into context later once we start adding in some percussion and go through the rest of the track. We'll just make sure I'm happy with this, which is getting pretty close. Cool. All right. So for our click that I like to put on top of the bass line, I will create it from my kick drum plugin. So I'll duplicate this. Get rid of the MIDI. Copy the MIDI. So this click is going to play, and the reason I like to do this is I like my bass lines, the attack of my bass line, to sound like it's coming from the same source as the attack of the kick drum, so that my kick attack sounds like my bass line attack as well, or they're close to anyway, just so it has I like that it gives it a bit more of a unanimous relationship with one another. The way that we do that is I put a low cut on this kick. We'll get that volume right down. And we'll just dial this to personal taste, really, preference, whatever sounds good. And what sounds good to my ears, we'll have a little bit of a listen. So yeah, as you can see, it sounds like that click is a part of that bass line now. And although it's only making up a very small amount of the frequency content in this track, it really helps this bass line cut through the mix without compromising the characteristics and the tonalities of my sub. So the other thing I will do is just replicate the same ducking effect for the click, so it does sound like it's unanimous. And then we can just dial in the volume to taste. This can obviously be modulated, or not modulated, sorry, automated throughout the track. So when there's less amounts of information going on in the track, i.e. perhaps there's sections where there's percussion and hats aren't playing, I will dial this click down, as it can get a bit too prominent and it's not really required in those quieter moments of the track. However, it's super helpful when we're at a busier part of the track, say with all of our hi-hats, percussion, perhaps synths and everything playing. It helps to really kind of give that bass line a little bit more definition in the mix, so it can translate well to obviously on big systems, but on smaller listening devices. So that is that is how I do my kick and bass, quite roughly. I guess a really broad overview. I'll spend you could spend hours doing it, but that's the principles that I like to work by. And once I'm in the realm of what I want it to sound like roughly, then we can start to make small tweaks and edits, which I won't do in this video because I think it's all personal preference at this point here. You can then go and start to tweak your saturation, your filters in your Serum or whatever instrument you're using to dial in your own particular sound that you're after. So yeah, hopefully you found this video useful in creating the fundamentals of the kick and bass and the relationship. Obviously getting the relationship together is super important for this type of music. At the end of the day, it's going to be preferential to what your tastes are. However, I think the fundamentals are unanimous across any genre or taste. We need kick and bass phase relationship to be dialed in perfectly. This is how I kind of do that. So hopefully you can take some of these principles and use in your own productions. And yeah, I look forward to fleshing out this track concept a little bit more with this video tutorial series for Dark Prog. But yeah, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments or send me a DM. I'll be happy to explain further or offer any assistance to my process here for kick and bass. So yeah, thanks for watching and keep an eye out for the next one. Cheers.